Okay, so we'll move on with our agenda, and I am delighted to introduce Dr. Sasha Rabkin, who is president of Equal Opportunity Schools. And he's coming to us from beyond Kentucky today, and I'm sure he'll tell you about that. I want you to know how I was acquainted with Dr. Rabkin. Our commissioner, Dr. Glass, introduced Dr. Rabkin to me. And so it is from that conversation that I invited him to come and share with us. So welcome, Dr. Rabkin, and share with us what you all do at your organization.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I really appreciate it. I'll try to live up to Dr. Glass's introduction and to all the incredible conversations. I've learned a lot. I've been on for the last hour or so and have learned a lot myself. So I'm honored to be able to contribute and be a part of this. I have some slides I'm going to share here in a little bit with all of you. But just a brief introduction about our organization. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we understand this question of acceleration, particularly within the context of those students who don't historically show up in the kinds of ways that we measure academic acceleration, aptitude, and other things, particularly in high schools and the work we're doing in high schools across the country to reimagine and redesign how schools are using new kinds of data, new kinds of science, new kinds of insights to what we talk about as widen the aperture of readiness, right? When you widen an aperture on a camera, you let more light in. And in letting more light in, you see more contours of the landscape. And so we're building tools to help schools do the same thing for their students. So I'm going to share some slides. Hopefully you all can see them okay. I'll certainly share them with Tyler and Dr. Roberts afterwards so you can digest them and hope that this is the first conversation of many with you all as we go through this. I am going to share some of the information within the context of what we provide to schools. We're a national nonprofit organization. We serve 500 high schools across the country in 29 states. We sign up new schools to work with us every year. And we provide a set of tools. And from those tools, I've learned a lot, I think, about the topic that you all are discussing today. But I want to start, and I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and we'll certainly leave some opportunity for questions. But I want to start, and I start all of my presentations with this quote from The Invisible Man, because I think it sums up, in many ways, a lot of what's being discussed here, or at least a part of it, which is that when we refuse to see things, that's where the invisibility comes, right? The inability to see, or the willingness to see only the surroundings. And what we find in a lot of the schools we work with, that this is the experience of a significant number of students, that their aptitude, their capacity for acceleration, their capacity for achievement is masked behind a cloak of invisibility because the tools or the schools don't have the tools necessary to really see them in a multidimensional way. And so this idea that people see only my surroundings or themselves or figments of their imagination, that there's a lot of mythology that's been built around, as I think a lot of the comments were saying, about what it means to be ready for acceleration. And our job in the world as an organization is to break that down. Here's our mission, pretty straightforward. We very much believe in the importance of accelerated opportunities in public schools, and we believe that those have to be made available to the widest number of students that we can, and that in providing those opportunities, we not only transform the pathways for students, but we help ourselves as educators really think about the work that we do broadly and the way in which we can break down barriers. So we'll talk about how we do that and continue to move here. So we're really trying to do three things with our schools. One, moving from environments that prioritize one type of learning and intelligence to multi-dimensional definitions. And that the science of learning and development, the science of acceleration, the research that's gone on over the last 20 years fundamentally says that there are different ways to measure readiness, there's different ways to measure intelligence, and that things that we often can't measure as easily are just as important as the things we can. Not being able to measure something doesn't diminish its importance. Secondly, we're trying to move from places where it's the responsibility of the student to fit in here's a certain way to be the kind of student we prioritize, to really a focus on conditions that educators can improve. So acceleration, particularly if you're not the traditional accelerated student, is only is actualized when you find yourself in the right conditions. Some of us need more kinds of those conditions rather than less, because our capacity for acceleration is something that needs more tending, like certain kinds of flowers or certain kind of fruit or certain kind of vegetables. Not everything grows in exactly the same way. Third, that it's not about what's lost or not attained. This is not about saying students are or are not, or that what you don't have is more important than what you do. It's really about an acceleration of talent and genius. That there are young people in our schools, and we talk about this idea of the aspiration gap, that one of the most singularly important gaps that we could talk about in education, and I've been working in public education for 25 years, is the gap between the aspirations of the young people sitting in our buildings and our capacity to provide them with the opportunities that they require to fulfill those aspirations. And often, and in a lot of the data that we show, it's those accelerated opportunities that are the rungs on the ladder towards those aspirations. Doesn't mean everybody has to go to college, doesn't mean everybody has to take the accelerated opportunities, but the way in which we define those opportunities and the way in which we provide them to students does say a lot about how we think about the aspirations of those young people. And so that's something we talk about. And a few things about us that I'll get to here. As I mentioned, we work in about 500 schools across the country, including 7 of the largest 20 schools. I say that only because we survey students and staff in all of the buildings that we work with. So some of the data I'm about to share with you is from those surveys. This year, we surveyed 350,000 students across the country. We've surveyed almost 2 million students in our annual survey over the last 8 years. We have a lot of data on this topic. And so what I'm going to share with you, not that data is truth, but it's rooted in a very significant amount of data that we've gathered. The schools that work with us in their first year of working with us, on average, experience a 20% increase in the number of students taking and passing advanced academic courses in their building. Those are often students that are not identified in traditional ways. They're not identified on some of the measures that we've been talking about here in this conference. It's often, and I'll show you how we do this, shifting the inputs of how we measure and how we see these students to then make sure they're in the right classes, and triangulating information so that we're not just putting kids in whatever class we think is best for them, but we're using student level data to think about what they believe is best based on their interests and how they see themselves. We have an 85% renewal rate, and we generate our own revenue as a nonprofit. And I'm not sharing that to toot our own horn. I'm saying that to say that these tools are valuable to the schools that use them. And they're valuable because they help operationalize the work that's already happening. We're not creating new initiatives. We're not creating new things. We're taking the world of schools as they are right now, where there are these kinds of opportunities that research shows are better for students, that research shows students are more challenging, that research shows teachers are often more excited to teach, and we're expanding the ways in which they utilize those resources. And in doing that, it becomes a very cost-effective way to think about academic acceleration in your building and to think about academic outcomes. So over the last 10 years, we've supported schools to enroll 68,000 students, more students into advanced academics. 80% of the schools we work with maintain their pre-growth pass rates and test taking rates if it's a test assessed advanced academic program. And so the idea is that we are finding and identifying students who are doing just as well as students who are enrolled in these programs in more traditional ways. We do that with 4 things, and I'm going to breeze through these and then have some time for questions here. 1, in order to change the way we provide academic opportunities, we have to have new kinds of data. We cannot simply wish that the outputs shifted without changing the way that we think about the inputs that come into the building. So we have to change the way that we have data. And so our work with student and staff surveys, 25-minute survey, providing an incredibly rich source of data so that people can understand the problem that they're trying to solve and think specifically about what it means in their building. Secondly, we have a tool that I'll show you, the Student Insight Card. We have to change the way that we see, engage, and resource every student. And that's going to be the topic here in just a minute. But if we don't change the way we see students, if we don't change the way we engage with them, we can't change the way we resource them. So fundamentally, our work is about widening, as I mentioned, widening that aperture and thinking differently about how we do this. Third, it's not just about identifying the student. An essential quality of access and opportunity to academic acceleration is the conditions we create in those classrooms. And so we measure 5 conditions of belonging, which we help schools understand how they are scoring on those conditions. Those conditions, our data shows, correlate directly to achievement. So they're conditions that I can control as an educator. And when I control them and when I improve them, my students feel like they belong in my classroom and my students do better in my classroom. As we think about widening that aperture, it becomes very important that the conditions that we put students in meet who they are and how they see themselves as learners. And then lastly, which I think is evident from what Tyler and others were talking about, this isn't really about data. It's not really about our students. It's really about us as adults finding the time to think about the adaptive qualities it takes to lead this kind of work in schools. And so for us as a nonprofit, we send coaches and staff to schools that we work with who help them understand how to operationalize this work. It's not just emailing people a bunch of data reports. This is human work. This is on the ground work. As we all know, education is a very local engagement. It's a very local endeavor. We're in the communities with our schools, really helping to understand how to root this in real conditions. So 3 things real quick. As I mentioned, we provide new kinds of data to schools. So everybody takes the student and staff survey. And I want to just share a couple things just that are emblematic of the kind of data. So we ask staff across the country. We surveyed 25,000 staff this year, what courses they believe are challenging or very challenging. And I'm not here to debate challenging or very challenging courses. What I'm here to talk about is that when we share this kind of data with schools, particularly when it's their data, this is national roll-up data, and we can help them see that such a small percentage across the country, only 29% of teachers say their standard level courses are challenging or very challenging. That calls into question how we're understanding what it means for students to achieve in those classrooms. And when we add, for instance, another data point about staff reporting what are very good predictors of success, particularly in AP, and in this environment, we're talking about AP and IB, but we talk broadly about other programs, Cambridge, dual enrollment programs, things like that. You can see, and again, I'm not debating prerequisites, GPA, and test scores here at the bottom. What I'm saying is that the staff that we survey don't consider those to be the best predictors. And what they're really interested in as we think about widening the aperture is this idea of motivation, perseverance, and mindset. And so when you think about students being in a class that very few adults in that building believe is challenging, and staff saying we're not using the right criteria to let them out of that class into a more accelerated opportunity, that presents a real challenge. And so what we've done is build a tool called the Student Insight Card that is on top of all the tools that schools are already using. It's all derived from this same 20-minute survey. And what it allows us to do, and then I'll stop here, and Tyler, help me make sure that I don't go over, but I think I have a few more minutes here. I'll stop for some questions here in a minute. What we do is we provide a host of data. So instead of just relying for a young man like Trevor on grade point and test scores, which is important and can tell us something, we take a host of insights from Trevor's survey and start to help schools understand Trevor in a multidimensional way. What are Trevor's educational goals, career interests? Every student that takes our survey identifies a trusted adult in their building. So now we have an adult that Trevor is saying he already has a relationship with, and we can activate that adult. And maybe not surprising to folks on this call, 40% of the adults that students identify across the country are not instructional staff. They're coaches, they're office managers, even the custodial services. And so we're helping schools map trust and map relationships so they can activate those relationships, because maybe it's not the counselor that should talk to Trevor. Maybe it's the assistant coach on the track team that should talk to Trevor about these opportunities. And remember, we're talking about students who would not automatically be on these lists of students that we're accelerating. This is widening the aperture, changing the way we think about this. We also have his interest and teacher recommendations. We then have a host of questions on our survey that help us understand Trevor's approach to learning, his learning mindsets, things like focus, growth mindset, community leadership, things that academic research have demonstrated correlates to the achievement of young people in schools. These are not just soft, wouldn't it be cool, squishy things. These are real conditions, real mindsets that are showing considerable impact on the future achievement for young people. And then we're also helping schools understand Trevor's specific barriers. Why isn't Trevor taking these classes? How does Trevor understand the pathways available at his school. And again, this is all personalized. So we've shared data about your school, and now we're sharing data about Trevor. And then we have open responses at Trevor. And then this is all translated into an online platform where we can sort and filter, so we can create a group of 10th grade students, just like Trevor, who all also have Stephen Jones as their trusted adult, who are also all interested in math, and help schools think about who are those 25% of students that we're not identifying organically, that we can start to see and understand how to triangulate data so that we're making sure that these young people have the best opportunity. It does not mean that Trevor has to take an advanced course. We don't put Trevor in that course. It means that we must see, engage, and resource Trevor in order to know for sure that we're not missing out on somebody whose acceleration is the only thing standing between them and future achievement. And then, as I mentioned, we have this conditions of belonging that we help schools so that they can start to see, as an example here, how their current students in their advanced courses are understanding the kinds of things that correlate to relevance in those classes. And we can help people see how to create pathways to improvement. And so it's through all of those things, and we translate, as I mentioned, into an online platform so everybody can sort and filter this data, can start to activate it, can start to think differently about this. And it's through this that we really start to understand how to see, engage, and resource, that there are very important standardized tools out there, and they have a role to play, but they do not tell us the full picture of young people in our schools. They tell us a partial picture. And if we don't widen the aperture and we don't think about the inputs, the kinds of data that we need to change the mindsets of those of us on the ground, the kind of data we need to change the way we see students like Trevor in our building, we can't get to that next level of academic acceleration, and we can't start to meet the needs of all of our students. We believe that it's in accelerated opportunities that a significant number of students can and will achieve if we give them the right opportunity. That's what our data shows over the last 10 years. That's what we know about young people, as I think the example of walking versus crawling. Some just do it a little bit later, and some just do it a little bit differently. And what we just need to accept as educators is that we need those tools. We need different ways to look at that. And so it's our mission in the world to help schools provide that on top of what you're doing, not instead of what you're doing, with tools rooted in data, rooted in insights from your school buildings, rooted in data from your communities, to really say, how can we start to think about that next 20 or 25% of young people? Oh, I'll stop here for some questions. I'll certainly share this PowerPoint. Certainly would love to talk and have conversations with folks. As I mentioned, we're always recruiting new schools to join our cohorts each year. Are very excited about our work with Dr. Roberts, who we're already learning a lot from, and from Tyler and the team. So looking forward to being a part of the community in Kentucky, working with Commissioner Glass and working with the team here to continue to be of service to you all, and really excited to be here, and I'll stay on for some questions.
So Dr. Rabkin, while others are putting questions in the chat, tell them how you got to know Dr. Glass.
Sure, thank you. And you all know Dr. Glass. He's very exceptional. You all are very lucky to have Dr. Glass as your commissioner in education. But we've been in a cohort together at the Spencer Foundation, which is one of the leading philanthropies supporting education research. And he and I were in a small cohort meeting together, and we ended up in a conversation about this very topic. And as you all can imagine, the first person he says, you have to go talk to Dr. Roberts. And so he and I have been talking a lot about how states can support this work. We have a partnership with the state of Maryland, who offsets the cost for any school in the state of Maryland that wants to work with us. And so he was very interested in how we think about some of those things, and how we do that work. And so it's through this education research where we're thinking about the future of assessment together that he and I had the chance to first meet and have this conversation. And now I'm here with you all and Dr. Roberts. So I'm very excited about that.
So Tyler, what questions are in the chat? Any?
I am not seeing anything that has come through just yet.
So let me just reflect with you, Dr. Rabkin. There's so many things you said that are exactly what we believe in, and that we know that we need more advanced learning opportunities in all of our schools, no doubt. I really love the fact that you're looking at what makes students comfortable in the school. who do they know? Who do they connect with? Talk just a little bit more about that, if you would. I think that's an essential, by the way, if
I
you
appreciate
want to
that.
go to school.
Yeah, I do as well, and not just for the selfish reasons that it's something we talk about, but as a student too myself, struggled mostly because the conditions weren't right. I think I turned out okay, but it wasn't because school was a very easy place for me to be. So I think there's a couple of things. I think one is it's okay to accept that a lot of the tools that we use um, aren't sufficient to tell us the full story of young people. And so one thing we know, and we knew this before the pandemic, but certainly our experiences in the pandemic, is that we relied a lot on proximity. When our students are in the building, when our students are close to us, we can see, we can engage. But once we lose that, and particularly as we start to think differently, we realize that a lot of this stuff is very fragile. Young people are malleable. They're going through the world just like us as adults, and we know how fragile it is. And so how we experience this idea of conditions, there's a lot of really good research, obviously, in clean water and things like that, right? I live in outside of Seattle. There's people who are charged with protecting the water that I drink all the way up to the glacier that it melts from. We know that there are leading indicators of healthy drinking water. For some reason in education, we just want to treat the water. We just want to treat it coming out of our tap. And I think when we start to think of education as a set of conditions that we can control as educators, it's more empowering. We don't pathologize young people. We don't blame young people. We can really say, this is what can we control and how can we create that? And what our data shows is that it is really as simple as I was just waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder. That as a young person, I didn't know. About 50% of the young people we survey say, I don't think I'm allowed to take those courses. And again, our counselors that we work with in our schools will say, no, 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 we tell them every year it's okay to take this. But if I'm a young person who doesn't think I'm the kind of student that you're talking to, it's really that simple. And all of a sudden I'm in 11th grade or I'm in 12th grade and I think I'm doing okay because I'm getting decent grades, but I haven't actually challenged myself. And I think we all know that as you start to think about college, those things become really important. So the relationships, this idea of trust is hugely important for education. And the idea of conditions that we can create and that we can control so that young people see themselves reflected in the environments that we're teaching. We just see that there's really no other way. And it's not just for those not important. I think even one of the reasons, my experience, why students who do enter into accelerated opportunities do so well is in part because they finally find places where those conditions match who they are. And so we're just simply trying to enlarge the concept of that and think a little bit differently, but think about leading indicators, not lagging indicators. And I think that's just a more empowering way to think about ourselves as educators.
Oh, that's so important. And I think it highlights for each of us how vital it is when we recognize that a student should be doing something because you see that capability, that you tap them on the shoulder and say, I think you'd be just right for this opportunity, whatever that opportunity might
Very,
be.
very powerful. It's
I,
very
I
powerful.
hear people say that a teacher did that. The teacher may not even remember it. It happened so
That's right.
normally,
That's
but
right.
it
That's
meant
right.
everything to the child.
I see a question in the Tyler, maybe you were going to just highlight this. So I see Elizabeth's question, which I can address. And thank you for visiting the website and thank you for finding it. So we had an initiative, which we are now building on. We had a very specific initiative, but one of the things that we know about our data is that we can help schools identify very specific students who are interested in STEM careers, but are not accessing these opportunities. And so we created a national network of schools who really wanted to increase, particularly their advanced academic STEM enrollment. And we created a set of conferences. We first started in the Bay Area, and now we're doing this across the country. So that was our incubation in the Bay Area, rising STEM scholars and getting schools from across the country who really wanted to activate their STEM orientation. And we then did a whole set of trainings on how to do that, why to do that. And then they were using our data, like the Insight card, for instance. Trevor's interested in math, or we can see which students want to take AP computer science, for instance, and we were helping those schools to focus specifically on STEM opportunities, and then providing new kinds of professional learning opportunities for those teachers and kind of give ourselves a STEM focus. So it's something really interesting that we piloted and are now using across our schools in the country, and that's available to any school that works with us, is this STEM data and a whole host of information on STEM courses and STEM achievement. Thanks for
In
asking.
Kentucky, a resource for all of us would be Advanced Kentucky that supports specifically science and math and English classes that are AP classes and work with teachers. So if that's something that's not available in your schools, reach out to that. You know, when we're talking about STEM, Kentucky does not require Algebra 2. Um, and all of us think for a moment, what are opportunities that will not be available to the student who does not take and pass Algebra 2? And those aren't only college-bound opportunities. That certainly would be true for many of the trades that you would have to have that kind of a background to enter. And I presume students are taking Algebra 2 in your schools, but I don't know that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Tyler, I see your question as well. We actually have only ever had one high school in Kentucky, and that's part of my reason for reaching out to Dr. Roberts originally. So we don't have a lot of data on Kentucky schools because we haven't worked with a lot of Kentucky schools. And I'm hoping to change that with you all over the last few years. We've had an ongoing relationship with our friends in Paducah. I don't know if any of them are on here, but we actually haven't. I mean, we think we're in a lot of places, but as you all know, 500 schools is a drop in the bucket of schools across the country. So we're actually hoping, both working with the state, working with Dr. Roberts, working with Dr. Glass, and building a Kentucky cohort for our fall 2024 school year. And so certainly, selfishly, if anybody wants to reach out, we'd love to talk to you. But also, we're going to be working, I hope, with the Gifted Education Network to just think about ways to be a resource. We're not we want to be a partner. We're not here to do anything for you or do anything to you. We want to be invited in. We want to be a partner with you all. So I'm hoping that that'll change. And by next year's presentation, we'll have lots of Kentucky data. But in the meantime, I can look at some other ways. And I see one other thing. And Tyler, keep me focused on time here. Thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate your question. We get asked that all the time in all of our schools. Can we have a middle school version of what we do? We are piloting it this year and hope by next year to have an initial cohort of middle schools. You all know education. It's not just a one-to-one match to do what we do in high schools and middle schools. There's a little bit of some trickier stuff, but we're working on it. And we do think things like the insight card and some of that relational data can be really helpful to our middle schools. But the pathways are a little different. Pathways are a little bit more fixed. We're not exactly humbly, not exactly sure how to do it, but we're looking forward to piloting this year. We have about 20 schools that are piloting it, and then we'll go from there. So again, on the front end, and we'll certainly keep folks posted on that. And do reach out. Tyler has my information. I'll certainly make sure that you have the access to the PowerPoint I shared. And really looking forward to being a part of this network with you all over the next few years as we do this work together.
And you see, unless we know about you, that's not even an opportunity, which
That's
is
right.
why I
That's
thought
right.
it was so important for you to be with us. And I think that B's question about the middle school is terribly important because it's really in middle school that many of these students either get the inspiration or lack the aspiration. I love your aspiration gap. I've written that down. But if you don't aspire to do something that includes advanced coursework, and if you don't know you
That's
need
right.
advanced coursework to do whatever it is you have as your goal, it doesn't work well.
That's right. Well, we did an early pilot, which might be of interest to folks in a large school district with a middle school. So we surveyed all their high schools. We took these insight cards and we had some workshops with the middle school teachers, and it was fascinating to us how many of the students we identified in the high school who weren't taking advanced courses that the middle school folks are saying they were in advanced courses in 6th or 7th grade. And so somehow in their acceleration, but 6th and 7th, they're doing well. Something happens in 8th or between 8th and 9th, like the chasm between 8th and 9th, it was actually really fascinating for us to realize that we were simply re-identifying students for the system who'd actually been in some of these gate classes in 6th and 7th, but the school district hadn't tracked them well into high school. ended up in a standard level course in ninth grade, and now we're kind of languishing as one of those unchallenged students. So we know that the pipeline is not always as comprehensive as we want it to be. And again, I think this is as simple as being able to see, engage, and resource. These are students in our buildings. It's not magic. It's not rocket science. It's really just saying there are things that matter for young people's learning and the conditions that we create in middle schools and in high schools. And so we're not trying to oversimplify it, but our schools have proven to us that if we look at the right inputs, we can make the outputs better. And so we're hoping to take that to the middle schools. And yeah, again, keep you posted. And we feel the same way about learning about you all. So there's some incredible folks on here that I can't wait to follow up with. And again, really looking forward to working with any of you that want to, and then of course with Dr. Roberts and the team.
Well, I would have to say the people on this webinar today are outstanding educators who are looking out for their students. And that's why they spend a Saturday morning getting up to date at the Gifted Education Update. Yes. Any other questions for Dr. Rabkin? I think it's great that you joined us today from Seattle. Most of us are right here in Kentucky, so it's kind of nice to have a spread of geography.
Oh,
So
I appreciated it. I learned that you all have 2 time zones. So I learned a lot about Kentucky this morning, and I appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here, and I look forward to having the chance to be in the state and do some visits and meet any of you all. So again, don't hesitate to follow up, but we'll certainly be around. And Dr. Roberts, thank you for what you've done to invite us here, and obviously for all the work that you've done in the state and elsewhere. You have big shoes to fill, and excited to follow.
I think we're a team. Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Thank you all so much for letting me be here. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to having the chance to be together again.
So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Tyler, for all your work.